Hello and welcome. My name is Seamus, and usually that was the intro for Killing the Church. And this is kind of a Killing the Church, but Brad is missing today. This is just me. I'm doing a short rant on Killing the Church topic, more or less. But this is basically a topic I've been meaning to talk about. I've wanted to go ahead and get this one off my chest. I may even start doing a short mini-series where all I do is go on a short rant about a particular topic. We'll see how much ground that gets or how popular, depending. We'll see how that goes. But the idea, I'm just going to give you my ideas, my opinions about a particular topic and the way I feel about a certain thing, and you can agree or you can disagree or what have you. But so I figured I'd start with heresies, because this is something that I think really grinds my gears, for lack of a better use of words, to quote Family Guy. So anyway, what I'm going to get into is using the word, how it should be used, and what about it I don't really like. And before we do that, even though this is not traditionally Killing the Church, this is still a Killing the Church. So I will be having myself some whiskey tonight. I'm having the Lagavulin 11-year, the Nick Offerman edition. This is one of my absolute favorites, quickly becoming one of my absolute favorites. For those of you who haven't tried this before, I highly recommend it. So, let's get into it. Heresies. We need to stop using that word. There's a few reasons I feel that way. One, if you are anybody other than a Catholic, then essentially you've put yourself in a position where you're a hypocrite. Because the Catholic Church is really the inventor of this idea of a heresy. And by using their proclamations, you are submitting yourself to their authority. And one of the things that they've proclaimed is that if you are not yourself a believer of the Catholic faith, well, then you are, in fact, a heretic. They've declared that to be a heresy. So if you go back into the history of heresies, it is strictly a Catholic thing, and it is essentially the Catholic asserting its authority over what can and cannot be taught and what is not part of the Catholic faith. So by definition, anyone who's a Protestant, which is probably 99% of the people listening to this particular podcast, or even those who follow us on TikTok or what have you, many of you are not Catholics. We do not attract many of those. We have a few, I'm sure, but not a lot. So unless you're a Catholic, you would be a heretic by definition. So anytime you use this word against somebody, you are affirming the Catholic authority on what is and is not heresy. And you can see where that quickly becomes a problem, right? Where you're using an affirmation of authority which you yourself reject. I don't think it takes a genius to figure that one out. I think you see where I'm going with that. So what do I assert that we should do otherwise? I think that one's easy. Simply call it a belief of yours that it is a false teaching, that you believe that it is a false teaching. I think that's a better way of saying it, because here's what you do when you call somebody a heretic. Not only do you affirm the authority of the Catholic Church, of which you do not submit yourself to, which is in and of itself a hypocritical claim and really a faulty appeal to authority, kind of. It's really slippery there. But you ostracize people. You openly reject them, you insult them, and you tell them they are not good enough to engage with conversation. And that's not healthy. It's probably the biggest cop-out that I think any believer can use against another believer. Put it this way. Instead of trying to understand the other person's opposing viewpoint and asking them questions and attempting to really gain an understanding from their perspective on why they might think a certain way, you hear it and immediately instead resort to ostracizing that person and insulting them And the last thing that person wants to do with you from that point on is engage with you in any kind of conversation in any real sense of the word. When you use the term heresy against another person, you've told them, I would rather be in an echo chamber, more or less, instead of engaging in conversation with this person. What are some examples of this? I think we overuse this word a lot. I think people tend to use this word when they just simply disagree with a certain teaching. So every particular denomination might have its own versions of heresies. But again, going back to the history of the word, these were things that were defined by the Catholic Church. And many of the ones that are quote unquote heresies today that people quote as heresies are the ones that were deemed as such by the Catholic Church. Remembering that the early Catholic Church was more political than it was religious. It was more about the elites had a certain viewpoint, and with the Roman Empire behind them, they could implement their beliefs by force and ostracize anybody who disagreed with them. And this is where they came up with many of the heresies, because they could. They could convert by the tip of the sword, and they could ostracize you by the tip of the sword as well. And so if you were not one of the elites who were invited to these councils that could decide what the faith of the greater majority was going to be, well, then your opinion didn't matter. And you were called a heresy whether or not you were invited to the council to even share your opinion and your viewpoint and put up an argument. And in fact, many times when these councils were called, the opposing views weren't even invited. In many cases, the opposing viewpoint, if they even showed up, sometimes they did, it's because word got around and they eventually figured it out. And so they came in last minute, but by no means were they invited on purpose. They were intentionally left out. And so once again, you call heresy, you're saying, I would rather be in an echo chamber. Now, this is my personal viewpoint, but here's what we should be doing. I think we should be engaging with conversation with these kinds of people. Now, there are certain things that obviously are absolutely heresies, but I think that list of things should be incredibly limited. Things like idolatry. Anyone who teaches to engage in idolatry, that is a heresy, absolutely. But that list should be short, because to insinuate that early Christianity, especially in its first few hundred years of since its foundation, was by no means monolithic. And so to declare something a heresy is to insinuate that it was in fact a monolithic black versus white, like black and white ink kind of thing, one idea versus another. And that's simply not the case. There were already hundreds of denominations by the time the First Council of Nicaea is called for. But very few of those were actually being represented at the council because they weren't invited. Eventually, this chain of non-invitations creates the great schism that eventually happens between the Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox churches. Because eventually, after a while, when one point of view has half the support and the other point of view has the other half of support, but one half is being ostracized, they get fed up with that. And that's kind of what happened later on. So that, what we should call a heresy, that should be incredibly limited, I think. For example, recently, as some of you may know, we are a primarily Torah observant channel. We promote Torah observance at your own leisure. We do not force it upon anybody here. We encourage it for sure, and we ourselves happen to be Torah observant, and we admit our biases up front about that. But many conversations I've had where I've been called a heretic because I choose to observe the commandments. And once again, all you're doing is you're ostracizing the opposing party, and you're submitting yourself to the authority of the Catholic Church, of which usually the person saying such a thing denies the authority of the Catholic Church. So it's just a problem. It's a problem, and I think it needs to be killed in the church. So instead of using the phrase heretic, we should instead say, I believe this is a false teaching. And then back it up. Have a conversation. I think it would be more beneficial to engage in conversation with an opposing viewpoint. But when you cry heresy, you're doing quite the opposite of that, quite frankly. And once again, if you're not a Catholic, then you are by definition a heretic. In fact, you know what? I had this pulled up. Might as well cite it real quick here. Where did I put it? I have a citation about the use of the word heretic. Here it is. Here we go. The Codex Justinianus, I think is, sometimes, defines everyone who is not devoted to the Catholic Church and to our Orthodox holy faith is a heretic. If you're looking for the reference for that, that is 1:5:12. So there you go. In case you were wondering. So unless you're a Catholic, I would really abstain from using that word unless it's something that's clear that, I talk about Marcion on this channel a lot, on my Talk channel. Marcion, I call that man a heretic, and I think I have good reason to do so. He believed that there were two different gods, a God of the Old Testament and a God of the New Testament. That's polytheism, no matter how you slice it. And I think that is something worthy of calling heresy, for sure. But a simple disagreement about somebody's practice, or even a belief, a particular belief that has been in contention in the church for the greater part of 300 years before they finally came to some sort of conclusion or compromise at the council, and stayed in constant contention for another 40 years after that, even with the way they worded certain codices or creeds to insinuate that anything that existed before that, any belief system that existed before that, is absolutely heresy. And any Christian who believes in a system that predates the councils are themselves heretics. I think is a dangerous place to go. Essentially, for one quick example, many Christians will use the Trinity and call Unitarianism a heresy. And again, that's a Catholic claim, and that's fine. However, there were millions of Christians who were Unitarian long before Tertullian showed up. And even in Tertullian's day, he notes that nobody liked his claims initially because they called him a polytheist. This indicates that Christianity at large was largely Unitarian and rejected the idea of a trinity as being triune rather than a triad. So you've essentially ostracized and damned to hell every Christian who predates the Council at Nicaea. And furthermore, you essentially condemn a large portion of modern day Christians. Go to any lay Christian person. Not every single Christian is well-read, is fluent and familiar with a working knowledge of Greek, or even familiar with all of the creeds, right? Like the Athanasian Creed. The Trinity is so incomprehensible. It's logical nonsense. And to ask any lay Christian person to define it, and if they get it wrong, well, they're a heretic and they're condemned to hell because they believe in the wrong Trinity. I mean, how could you possibly demand that of a simple layperson, of the non-scholar Christian who doesn't quite seem to get it because the logics of it don't make sense to him? This idea that he seems to see a subordination, right, to God the Father, but himself still being God, just doesn't seem to sit well with everybody. And so even most Christians that use words like Trinity, that are lay Christians, still use it in the way that Tertullian originally meant it in, as a triad, as three. So you've essentially condemned a very large portion of Christianity based on the fact that they don't quite comprehend something that is more or less incomprehensible. And you have to admit, even yourselves, that it's incomprehensible. In fact, that's part of the Trinitarian argument, is that God is incomprehensible, and so we're not expected to fully comprehend it. Do you see where I'm going with this? So now using the word heresy on something that is incomprehensible is a really dangerous place, and you've ostracized quite a lot of people. This is my opinion. So we need to get rid of this. As a Unitarian myself, and I'll admit all of my biases. I did not start out a Trinitarian when I first read the Bible. I started out a Unitarian. I later became a Trinitarian in university, and then I left Trinitarianism in university. But at no point, even when I was a Trinitarian, did I believe that Unitarians weren't saved because they believed the wrong thing. Historically speaking, believing the wrong thing was not nearly as important. It's not until the Western Greek mindsets get a hold of the scriptures that they put this emphasis on you have to believe the correct thing. And i.e., you have to have a certain level of comprehension in order for you to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And that's incredibly Western invention, and it is not originally even part of the Jewish culture in any of the subsects of Jewish culture. It was more important that you tried to do your best to live an obedient and good life. And really the only prerequisite to belief was the belief in a single God. But beyond that, you were allowed to disagree. In fact, disagreements and discourses were encouraged to keep you from being complacent. But when you throw out the term heresy, you discourage discourse. You discourage conversation. And again, you ostracize the very people that would otherwise be your brothers and sisters in Christ. And I have a problem with that. That's just me personally. So, as a Unitarian, I don't think the Trinitarian viewpoint is a matter of salvation. I don't tell Trinitarians that they are idolaters, that they believe in three gods, not one God, and that they're fooling themselves. I don't go around saying these things. I understand that if you read the Greek texts, you could quite possibly come to that conclusion. I understand that it also depends on the way that you were raised, the kind of churches you grow up in. Your presuppositions very well determine the way that you come to the scriptures. And I don't go around telling people that they are not saved because of it, because their intention is still that they believe that there is one God. I think that they are mistaken, but that's all that it is. It is a mistake. It is hardly heresy. And you could say the same of me. You could believe that I am mistaken, and that's fine. You can believe that I am mistaken, but I would hardly call it heresy to believe in to have such a strict view of the belief in one God. It's just a different perspective, in my opinion. And I'm trying to be as objective as possible here. If I were a Trinitarian, which I was at one point, I would simply say of the Unitarian, he still fits the definition of Christ follower. He is still a follower of the Messiah. And most Unitarians still believe in a divinity of Jesus, of Yeshua, just not that he is God, but divine, like an angel, but better than an angel, higher than an angel. So I really don't see the big issue here, right? Again, this is me personally. And I could be mistaken, and that's fine. Talk with me about it. Don't just call me a heresy and push me to the side, or anyone for that matter, who may disagree with your particular viewpoint. Instead, we should be asking the kind of questions to try and fully understand the other side's viewpoint. Because here's the deal. When you say heresy, you are claiming that the world is black and white. It is not. Everything is nuanced. There's always a much larger conversation. And there is a reason people all over the world think a certain way. So find out what that reason is. It's not often you'll find that people just blindly obey. You'll actually find that that's actually incredibly rare. You'll find very often instead that if you have conversations with most of these people, that you disagree with, that they have a certain understanding, and it's not that it doesn't make sense. It may not make sense to you, but it makes sense to them. And so it's your job to find out why it makes sense to them. And usually when you do that, you'll find that the conversations are much more nuanced than just, I'm right and you're wrong. You may end up finding rather that instead there's a disagreement for a reason. The only reason the heresies exist is because, keep in mind, the Romans, the Catholic Church had the Empire of Rome behind them, and they converted people by the tip of the sword. It was the elitists who were very elitists. Those are the ones saying you have to believe as I do, or you're not part of the group. And they had to bully people into submission to getting that to happen. Everyone loves to point to Saint Nicholas, right? He used to apparently go around punching people who were Arians, essentially. The belief that Messiah is a created being. Just use that as an example. That's a perfect example. If your doctrine is so correct, then why do you have to go around bullying people into submission to get them to believe it? You see, these councils, the Catholic Church, it's all politics. The Roman Empire never truly fell. It only traded hands. It took a different religion and traded hands. It was all politics. Go look at the history of the Council at Nicaea as an example, and you will find that it is largely politics that drove them to the council to begin with. And you'll find that it is largely politics that brought them to their conclusion. The idea of same substance was actually a compromise between two opposing viewpoints, because they were more interested in unity. Constantine was more interested in unity and maintaining a control in his empire than he was about religion. So we need to shed this word. It needs to leave our vocabulary. We instead need to just be more humble about what we think and what we say about what we think, and instead try to step into the shoes of the opposing side and really try to understand why they might think that way. We don't do this often enough. I'm going to turn to the comments real quick. I really hate the H word. Duotheism, new word. The T word. 3/4 will tell you that Jesus is the Father. Yeah, and according to the Catholic Church, and according to the Athanasian Creed, Jesus is not the Father, and so that's wrong. And so that's heresy. Patripassianism, I believe, is what it's called. And so basically a simple cognitive mistake has now doomed you to eternal hell. No, I don't like it. I don't like it. Trinitarianism is, in my opinion, the human mind trying to make sense out of the divine. And absolutely, it's even Tanya teaches that the divine is incredibly difficult to comprehend and understand. And in most cases, it's not even possible. That our 3/4 dimensional minds are not able to contain the infinite that is God. So, of course, God seems to be, in the scriptures, less worried about what we believe and more worried about how we believe, the kind of lives we live. Jesus seems to put a heavy emphasis on the life that you are living now more than what you think about God. And keep in mind, contextually, in ancient Israel, the life expectancy wasn't exactly very great, and so how you believed rather than what you believed was always more important, because you likely wouldn't live long enough anyway to go to school to be a great philosopher and ponder the infinite, right? And so the teachers of the day focused primarily on the things that you should be doing to be a good person, to again, once beyond belief in a single oneness of God, of God being of one God. Let me put it that way. Let me back up. Beyond belief in one God, what you believed after that hardly mattered, and it was always up for debate, and anything could challenge you at any time. Again, Christianity was largely, was far and away from a monolithic utopia that many Christians would like you to think it was. They'd like you to think that at the time Unitarian was a minority fringe group, like it was barely there, and that's why it was deemed a heresy. That's far from the truth. There were, again, 4 or 5 different versions of the Trinity rolling around at the time. And that's why they had to have the council in the first place, because there was no majority opinion. And it was politics that decided which one was going to be the majority opinion. And then again, with the power of the Roman Empire behind them, they made everybody change their minds or die. That was just the way that it is. That has become the heresies that we know today. So, back to the comments. Shalom. People that call names are more afraid of being wrong than proving truth. Rules for thee, not for me. Yeah, so anyway, I think I've driven my point home pretty well here. This was a rant from yours truly. It was going to be something that I needed to talk about longer. That would be too long for a 3-minute TikTok, but I don't think it would be long enough for a full-fledged Killing the Church episode with Bradley. So I may turn this into some sort of series where I just pick a topic and rant about it for a little bit. Things that are smaller topics, things that bother me, maybe, instead of like typically on Killing the Church, we mostly talk about theology and what that has to do and its role with the churches and everything like that. But this might be a series where I just take things that bother me and talk about the things that bother me instead. In a short, like, I don't know, 30-minute episode, which we're closing down on a 30 minutes here, I think. Yeah, we're at 30 minutes. So I'm going to end it here. Thank you guys for those of you who joined us and were here to watch and to comment. I appreciate you guys. And just remember, we're all heretics, every single one of us, because we're not Catholic. So keep that in mind next time you use the H word, and instead engage with your opposing side's viewpoint, and really try to understand why they think the way that they think. And you will quickly find that they actually have a compelling reason most of the time. Do this with teachings that are in Judaism, and you'll find that things that you once disagreed with, maybe not so much. A quick example before we go, I used to find it rather funny and even hilarious. And I used to laugh at the prospect of pre-tearing your toilet paper before the Sabbath day. Now, I myself do not partake in this, but Orthodoxy pre-rips their toilet paper before the Sabbath day because they believe that ripping toilet paper on the Sabbath day is considered work. But if you look into the reason why they do this, it's not as silly as it sounds. It's only when you dismiss it and laugh at it and then call that dumb, right, or stupid, and basically label it a heresy without really using the word, that you've already closed your mind to even beginning to understand why a person might do such a thing. And there is a law in the 39 melachot, the 39 prohibitions on the Sabbath day, of no tearing. Now, specifically, it's meant for being in the context of reaping and sowing and tearing, like making textiles and farming in some way. So you're not allowed to be tearing wool, right? But they continue to take this prospect and they don't tear anything that needs to be torn because of this prohibition. So, yeah, it might seem silly until you really inquire. So we should do that with everything. Trinitarian or not, Torah observant or not, people don't like being called a heretic, and many times these people are on your side. They are your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, and you are ostracizing them because they might have a mistaken belief about one thing or another. Something that doesn't truly rate the word heresy. You've now ostracized that person. That's not healthy, and it creates nothing but division rather than unity. And we should be trying for unity. So, I think that'll be it for me. I'm going to go ahead and sign out. Let's see here. I got to do this. I'm my own tech person today. Let's see. Yep. Music. There we go. Anyway, thanks again for joining. Thanks for listening to my rant. This has been Killing the Church on Heresy, a rant. And this is Whiskey. L'chaim.